Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Making Monsters. I'm Taylor Dahl, and we are now on to Bears versus Lions. The Bears have had a very interesting last few weeks. They've lost by a Hail Mary. They've lost by a blocked field goal. They've lost by now an overtime. And so it's been kind of a rough path, but you have seen Caleb Williams start to get better, and I think that's some of the things you want to see. But we're here to preview this Bears-Lions game, and Lions obviously one of, if not the best team right now in the NFL. And so Marc Ryan, he is the host of 97.1 The Ticket, covering the Detroit Lions, their network host. So Marc, thanks for hopping on with me.
Taylor, it's great to be on with you guys as well. Yeah, you know what? I always say you have to make sure you don't lose to the same team twice.
Yep.
And I call it for Chicago, not the Hail Mary, but the Fail Mary, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if they haven't lost that game 4 times in a row.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like they've recovered from that. And whenever they find themselves in a tight game, Eberflus is, I think, 5-18 in one-score games.
Yep.
It feels like they expect to find a way to lose. That's a bad place to be.
It is. And it was honestly a joke last week before the game, Marc, where we were saying, like, what crazy way are the Bears going to lose the game this week? And it ended up, Caleb, they go on this streak at the end where Caleb Williams gets them in the position to go to overtime. There's an onside kick, everything crazy that could possibly happen to build momentum your way. And it still wasn't enough once you got into overtime. And that's just kind of the place they're at. Unfortunately for Bears fans, it's kind of, they want to win, but at the same time don't want to win because they want Eberflus out. And if you win, Eberflus is not going to be out. So it's that weird kind of back and forth. I know Detroit Lions fans have been there in the past, but right now they're far from that. So let's start with Jared Goff. Jared Goff having a really good season, completing 72% of his passes, over 72% of his passes, 2,700 yards, 20 touchdowns, 9 picks. 5 of those picks coming in one game, though, against Houston. So if you take out that Houston game, that eliminates a lot of them. But tell us a little bit about Jared Goff, what you've seen so far.
You know, in full transparency, Taylor, this is my first season here in Detroit, and I didn't know whether he was a quarterback good enough to win you a Super Bowl. Like when you're not in the market, you're not studying the player as closely as when you're here. And I have this stat that I came up with: 30 of the last 32 years, the team that won the Super Bowl had one of 2 things: either the number 1 overall defense in the NFL or a top 10 statistical quarterback the year they won it. So then you're like, okay, well, the Lions certainly didn't have the number 1 defense last year. They were 19th. Did they have a top 10 statistical quarterback? Jared Goff last year was 9th in quarterback rating and 11th in QBR. So, I mean, it was as close to being on the line of good enough that you could possibly be. This year, for me, he has answered all those questions. And you know as well as I do, there's that criticism of him. Oh, man, he's a system quarterback. When everybody ranks their quarterbacks, he's like in the middle of the pack, and it's because he can't do things off script. That is a fair criticism, and it's also totally irrelevant because in this system, he's incredible. He is the best quarterback possible for the system in which he plays.
Yeah, and I honestly have been a big Jared Goff defender for a long time. I also, 3 years ago on Helmets and Heels, we always do our preseason predictions, and I was like, you guys are seeing the start of something really good in Detroit, and you could just see it. You could see the way they were drafting. It was so well, even though it really wasn't on script. They're drafting running backs when they just signed running backs, or they're drafting tight ends early, or they're getting offensive linemen early, and it really wasn't adding up to the normal formula that you would see from winning teams, but it's worked for them so well because they were going for pieces that fit their system and fit their scheme, and it's worked really well. I want to talk a little bit about the running backs because obviously David Montgomery, former Chicago Bear, there was already some people didn't really love David Montgomery leaving Chicago or how Chicago handled that, but having David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, it's just a win-win because those guys, neither one of them you could really stop, and there's just so much you can do with the both of them.
Taylor, how could you guys let him go? How could that possibly be?
I know.
You don't know what
he
you
chose
got.
Detroit. He chose Detroit.
Oh my gosh. I actually think we might be on the cusp of a running back renaissance. We all know how the position has been devalued. And the reason is that you can find, unless you have a true game breaker, you can find a 4th, 5th, 6th round running back that's as effective for you as a 1st round running back. The question is, are you getting a game breaker? Where there's only 5 or 6 of those guys in the NFL, and the Lions have 2 of them. Sonic and Knuckles, Gibbs and Montgomery. Montgomery's quickly becoming my favorite player in the entire league. I think he's the most underrated football player in the entire league. And I asked running backs coach Scotty Montgomery, where the chip he runs with on his shoulder, where does it come from? And he
Yeah.
said, life. He said, constantly being doubted, a difficult life, and the anger that he has built up in his body, he takes out
On
on
the field.
everybody he runs the football against. Taylor, it's a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, and I will say I always justify this by saying the Bears did match Detroit's offer, and David Montgomery chose the Lions, but they did, I think, offer him more money guaranteed. So that was one of the big factors, which makes sense, especially when you're a running back. And it is funny because just today on Helmets and Heels, I did a stat of talking about Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, and Josh Jacobs, who obviously all left their former teams or on new teams. Their new teams are, when you talk about the Eagles and the Ravens and the Packers, all look really good, and their former teams all do not look so good. So when you talk about that running back renaissance, so the importance of the running back, it's definitely there. Let's talk about the offensive line a little bit. That's probably one of my favorite things of how Detroit's built this team, because you do go through and they get a guy like Penei Sewell, who everyone kind of criticized them for drafting him so high, and he's genuinely a weapon. The things that they do, with that Ben Johnson does with Penei Sewell on the field, is just so fun to watch, in addition to just everybody else, that entire line that they've been able to build up. But how much does that factor in not only the run game, but also what Jared Goff can do?
Well, you're right about Penei Sewell being a weapon. I mean, they've got him catching hook and ladders out there. They've got him doing things like, when he's legally allowed to be down the field, he's as far down the field as you've ever seen, you've ever seen an offensive lineman. They play angry, and they lost Jonah Jackson in the offseason. Graham Glasgow steps in, and when you look at Taylor Decker, who on the left side really, really holds down the line, and then Frank Ragnow, in my opinion, is a three-time Pro Bowl 28-year-old center, in my opinion, a future Hall of Famer there. Zeitler has been massive as an upgrade at that guard position. If you look at the Pro Football Focus grades, 80s and above is very, very good. 80s and above is like Pro Bowl, and 90s and above is like Hall of Fame. And just about every game, they have one or two guys over 90 and a couple other guys over 80. And, to fit with the Lion description, they're mauling people.
Yeah. Which is where I'm very critical of the Bears offensive line. They have, when they're
it's
healthy.
Offensive. Let's be honest. It's offensive.
Yeah. I will say, though, when the starting five that are supposed to be the starting five are out there, it looks much different. The problem is they haven't been. Tevin Jenkins struggles with injuries a ton. Braxton Jones been banged up. Darnell Wright's been banged up. There was a point of time during the season where the only starter on the field was our center, and we had our third string left tackle out. So, of course, that's not going to look how you want it to look. But I will say that it's been a little better the last couple of weeks, and that's because your five have been out there, and that's against better defenses too. It's against Minnesota, and it's against the Packers, who have better defensive fronts. And when they create that pass rush, we talk about the Lions, the Bears, the Vikings, and the Lions, Bears, Vikings, and Packers all sit atop defensive categories in some form when it comes to takeaways, when it comes to the pass rush, when it comes to completion percentage allowed by a quarterback. All four of those teams lead in categories in certain areas. So that's why this division is so interesting. The Bears are under 500 though, and so they haven't been able to get it done, to your point, when it matters early. Let's talk about that receiving room a little bit. Amon-Ra, probably one of my favorite wide receivers in the league. I love his energy. I love the way he trash talks Packer fans and wears his Green Bay Sucks sweater. It's my favorite thing that I see out of this division, obviously hating. But I think Sam Laporta has been so fun to watch, and that's another guy that the Lions were criticized for drafting. Jameson Williams, you add him in and kind of what he adds to the offense. So what has been working so well when it comes to those pass catchers?
Yeah, so to your point, Jameson Williams has really stepped up. He's still doing some really knuckleheadish things off the field, but he's really stepped up. And, when you consider that on both levels, at the running game with Jahmyr Gibbs and in the passing game with Jameson Williams, they have a game breaker that requires you to cover the entire field. Amon-Ra's success, a good portion of it, is due to the space that Jameson Williams creates. And so that has been essential. And again, you are seeing how all these pieces meld and work together, and you're asking yourself, okay, if you are ranking weapons in the National Football League, Chicago's getting there, but Philadelphia,
Yeah.
Detroit, if you're ranking weapons, who's above those guys? You have two Pro Bowl caliber wide receivers, two Pro Bowl caliber running backs, a Pro Bowl caliber tight end, the best offensive line in the NFL, a quarterback behind all those that is the very definition of efficiency. But I will tell you this is a winnable game for Chicago. Detroit right now at the cornerback position, maybe no Carlton Davis in this game.
Yeah.
And Terrion Arnold is could be back this week. The hope is he's going to be back this week. Their replacement, you might remember, Taylor, Kendall Vildor was the guy who had the ball go off his face mask in the NFC Championship game.
Yeah.
He had a PFF grade of 29, and he played every snap last week. Caleb Williams' last two games, quarterback rating of 100, over 300 yards passing. The Bears are going to feast on Thanksgiving if the Lions don't have an answer at CB.
Yeah, Kendall Vildor, also former Bear, so we are familiar with him. Yeah, we're very familiar with Vildor.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I think that, and that's a good point, because when you talk about, it's a tale of two different sides, I think, in Detroit, because their run defense is one of the best in the NFL, and their pass defense definitely has struggled. And there are factors into that when you talk about injuries. Carlton Davis, I was a big fan of him in Tampa. And so obviously he's one of those guys that you kind of count on in certain moments, especially when you have a rookie in Terrion Arnold. So that is something that you would hope that Caleb Williams would be able to take advantage of, especially coming off these two last weeks that we've had. I think the main thing, though, is, and we talked about this earlier, is having that run game, and the run game being important. And you've seen some really big moments, especially in the second half, from DeAndre Swift. But if you're able to stop DeAndre Swift and really make Caleb kind of push things and really make him have to throw the ball, I think that's where the Lions could end up coming out of this. But to your point, if Caleb can do what he has the last couple of weeks against the struggling secondary, it could be a day where it's maybe a back and forth through the air between Jared Goff and Caleb Williams.
Yeah, no, it very well could be. And DeAndre Swift, another former Lion there.
Yeah.
There are so many parallels between these teams. It's really interesting, and kind of how, they've both had massive struggles lately as well.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I have not made a lot of friends here in Detroit about this, Taylor, in the sense that I actually root for the Bears, because I think it would be awesome if the NFC North this year could be the greatest division in NFL history. And the issue is, we need the Bears to kind of pick up the slack. We don't need them losing outside of the division games to Washington. We need that, because when you're with what you're seeing from Green Bay and Minnesota and Detroit, and then you consider, well, I actually think Chicago is a halfway decent team. Caleb Williams looks the part thus far this year. It becomes you realize just exactly kind of what they're up against. But DeAndre Swift, that running attack, I do believe that's going to be instrumental. So if they're one dimensional, Detroit has a very, very good pass rush grade. Zadarius Smith coming over from Cleveland, they have to be multi-dimensional in order to keep the chains moving, because Detroit is one of the best once you get down to the red zone. They allow plenty of yards in between the 20s. They really stiffen when you get down to the red zone. And I actually believe part of the reason Detroit's pass defense numbers are not so good is because teams are down by so many points that they have no choice but to throw against them all day.
Yeah, I actually had just posted a stat earlier in that reference. And this is what is frustrating, to your point about the Bears, because when you look at certain numbers of what the Bears are doing, it looks like they're in the category of a winning football team, but they're not. They're under 500. And this is one of those things that point out to it. So the red zone defensive scoring percentage, Denver's number 1, Detroit's number 2, to your point, only 40% allowed. Chicago's number 3 in red zone defensive scoring percentage. Then you flip over to red zone offensive scoring percentage. percentage, and it's Baltimore, Tampa, Cincinnati, Detroit, and Chicago. So Detroit and Chicago are both in the top 5 of both red zone scoring percentage and defensive scoring percentage, yet the Bears are under 500 and the Lions are one of the best teams in the league. And that kind of leads me to this point, which is coaching, Mark. And that's been the conversation. Dan Campbell, what he's been able to do with the Lions. Also, obviously, Ben Johnson, that's going to be somebody that the Bears are going to try and wheel in and get him this offseason, hopefully. Not sure how that's going to pan out. But that coaching just makes such a difference. You mentioned the stat of the 7-18 or whatever it is of what of what Matt Eberflus is in those one-score games, and you just that's to me an alarming stat. And then you have guys like Dan Campbell, who last year, or was it the year before, when they had started 0-5, he went on this big speech about, he was crying at the podium saying how upset he was for the players because they put all this effort in, and that's the type of coach that you want leading your team. How much does media, fans, players love Dan Campbell?
Well, I'll tell you, there's never been a more perfect fit between city and coach than what exists here. You have a rough around the edges town, people that have had hard lives, people that have chips on their shoulder, people that are like, you don't like us, well, then get the heck out, you know? And then you have a coach that fits that. But I'll tell you what's beautiful about Dan Campbell. He's actually brilliant. And the, kind of the meathead approach that he has kind of comes off as a little bit of a troll job. Because if you ever sit down and chat with him, and if you attend his press conferences, I have, you realize he's on top of every single intricate detail that's a part of the program. So if you just want to look at surface level, the guy's kind of a meathead. This blew me away, Taylor. I got a lot of respect for Colin Cowherd. In July, he ranked his top 10 coaches in the NFL, and Dan Campbell wasn't one of them. And I thought I was like, okay, I can't figure out what would be worse, that he didn't have it in there or if he forgot him. You know, which would be worse. And the next day on the show, he said, no, I didn't forget him. Like, I think he makes emotional decisions that keep him out of this list. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. He is, he and Brad Holmes, the general manager for this team, they're 1A and 1B. They are lockstep. They are in sync. And you wouldn't think the whole rah, let's be a family approach would work in the NFL. You've seen Dabo Swinney try to do that at the college level, and he gets made fun of. But with Dan Campbell, it works, and he gets more buy-in than any coach I've ever seen.
I love it. I love and like you said, it does kind of come off as the tough, rugged guy. It honestly reminds me of like my grandpa and my uncle, because they're from Chicago. They're these like tough, rugged, mean guys, but they're the first ones to cry at Rudy. And like, that's how I've always described them. Like they're passionate. They love what they love, but they will be tough when they need to. I think Dan Campbell is a little aggressive sometimes, but it's worked for them. And I think that shows his confidence in his team also, which I love. The Ben Johnson thing, let's talk about that for a second, because Ben Johnson's probably the most wanted.
Please stop, Taylor. Please. I'm not interested in this conversation.
You don't want him to leave.
Can I say this to you? What's the movie that makes you cry? Castaway for me, every single time. Really? It's not the Wilson. It's when he can't get his wife back because she moved on to somebody else. I can't handle it. Can't handle it. I will
say, like, I'm a movie crier in general, so a lot of movies make me cry. A lot of sports ones do. So I cried on Rudy. I cry on Remember the Titans every single time. Like, there's certain ones like that I'll always, but I'm also going to cry at The Notebook, and I'm going to cry at Dear John. Like, that's just how I am.
Same. Well, I will also cry if the movie is that Ben Johnson's going to Chicago. So let's try to prevent that from happening. Okay.
I do want to, let's just not even say Chicago. Let's say Jacksonville. Jacksonville's another one that's looking at him. Do you think Ben Johnson will be able to be successful at that head coaching position? Number one. Number two, how much do you think it will factor into what the Lions do offensively in Jared Goff?
Yeah, so I've actually pitched, why not pay Ben Johnson as a head coach? And, those guys have such a good relationship. You could make him co-head coach with Dan Campbell. There's no rule that you can't have co-head coaches. It's a really outside the box approach, but he's so critical to what they're doing and his creativity. You think of the situations that would appeal to Ben Johnson, and I think there's three: Cincinnati, Jacksonville, and Chicago. Now, the one thing I have, the relationship is so tight
Mm-hmm.
between he and Dan Campbell. I wonder if, from a loyalty standpoint, he wouldn't go to Chicago because, it kind of makes you public enemy number one. I didn't know this until I got here. There's like this, back and forth between Chicago and Detroit where
Yeah.
Detroiters feel like Chicagoans think they're better than them. And it's like they're white collar and they make us feel blue collar kind of thing. I don't know if Ben Johnson would do that to Dan Campbell. I
Yeah.
don't know. I understand why there would be interest. I'm not sure if he would do that loyalty wise, but I absolutely would be concerned about Jacksonville because he's going to think, Trevor Lawrence is a rehabilitation project
Mm-hmm.
that he can succeed at.
Yeah.
And then Cincinnati is ready made. They just need a defense. And you've got Joe Burrow, who, it's, to me, you mentioned Penei Sewell earlier. That decision, Jamar Chase over Penei Sewell, I think that was a failure. And it has nothing to do with Jamar Chase's ability. It has everything to do with what that team needs.
Yeah.
And they went for vanity over need. They bought a Porsche for a house that didn't have a roof on it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was a big conversation during that draft. I remember that was the hot topic that everyone thought the Lions screwed up that decision. And now it looks like, because we saw Joe Burrow injury after injury because of the offensive line not being able to protect him. And you do kind of feel like they've started to address that now, but because they've had to pay so much money to a lot of these other players, their defense has fallen off a cliff. So it's kind of like you can't win with the Bengals right now. A couple more for you, Mark, before I let you go. Just thoughts on the Bears as a whole. I know we've talked a little bit about how there's been, since Hail Mary, Fail Mary, it's just kind of felt like you're seeing that over and over again. But what have you seen in watching the Bears and Caleb Williams' development and a guy like Rome Odunze, some of those pieces that they did add this offseason?
Jaden Daniels would have been my number one overall pick. That said, I've been quietly impressed with what I've seen from Caleb Williams recently. I was worried that some of the maturity issues that we saw were going to really crop up, bad attitude, sulking. I haven't seen a lot of that. I've seen leadership at the podium, which makes me very, very hopeful for his future. So you like the weapons. What you don't like is the captain of the ship, quite honestly.
Yeah.
And you consider that 6.2 coaches lose their gigs every year in the National Football League. Last year it was 8. This year it could be 7 or 8. I'm wondering, when you consider that some coaches have already been terminated, why Matt Eberflus is still there. Do we or do we not subscribe to the notion that what must be done eventually should be done immediately? If you know that it must be done eventually, why not get it done now? And, there are countless times that you and I both could list where there's a change made and suddenly a team plays much better. It seems like they're being weighed down by a head coach that they don't believe in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that I defended Eberflus in moments just because of what kind of happened with the defense late last year and how he was kind of able to turn those things around. But it's really hard to deny the in-game decisions when it comes to time management, when it comes to timeouts, when it comes to some of those defensive play calling in big moments. The Hail Mary, for example, why Terry McLaurin's wide open for a 12-yard pass that ended up probably being the bigger play than even the Hail Mary, because you don't let that happen. Jaden Daniels isn't throwing an 80-yard Hail Mary. So I think that there are those things factoring in. I do want to ask you this, because you graduated from Florida, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about the why not, the quote you were just using of like, why not doing it now? The Billy Napier situation, I think, is some people's argument of why sometimes you wait. And so it is interesting of just how different situations work in ways that others don't. We saw the Bills last year fire their OC, and it worked fantastically. All of a sudden, Josh Allen had an incredible second half, and this year it looks like it was the best thing that they could have done. And then you see other situations where it's kind of like, okay, you don't see this immediate impact, because the big thing, Mark, is the Bears have struggled mightily finding that head coach, and it hasn't just been Eberflus now. It's been this rotating cycle of you keep John Fox, you draft a young quarterback in Mitchell Trubisky, then you end up having to fire John Fox, and then you keep Justin Fields and you go get Matt Eberflus, and then you end up having to, Matt Nagy, you end up having to fire Matt Nagy. And now here you are again keeping this head coach, giving him one more year, drafting a young quarterback, and now Caleb Williams is probably going to be on his third offensive coordinator in a year and another head coach. So it is frustrating, but I think a part of it is the higher up realizing and knowing how to find the right guy too, which has been a problem.
And I always say that intangibles make up at least 50% of the one-loss equation. And that's the thing. Intangibles are the thing that I think fans miss the most. Fans look at stats and skills and things like that. They're not around the intangibles. But when you see, when you see players sulking and when you see poor body language, you can tell when a coach has the ear of his team and when they don't. And you mentioned Billy Napier. And I, too, have been critical of Billy Napier in the past, wondering about a year ago when you're having, when you're frustrated as somebody who cares about the Florida Gators and they're not looking like, boy, this is a historically bad start. The Gators are playing so hard for him. You have to pay attention to that independent of the results.
Yep.
And again, I see a Bears team that expects to lose close games because all they've done is lose close games. And they expect they consistently have not played like a smart football team. Who is that a reflection of? Whose desk does that fall on? That falls on Matt Eberflus. So what are you waiting for? Why not get a jump on tomorrow today?
Yep. And I think that 95% of the Bears fan base would agree with you 100%. We've been having this Eberflus conversation. Even last year, most people wanted to fire him last year. And because of the fact that they knew we'd be getting a new quarterback. So why not go and try and find an offensive-minded head coach and get somebody who is going to be able to mold and develop this young quarterback? And unfortunately, it didn't happen. But Mark, anyways, how are you feeling? The thing broke out a little bit. Sorry. What are your feelings about this weekend, Mark?
So the feelings about this weekend, we're talking. So you asking for a prediction?
You don't have to give me a number. How are you feeling this game? Do you think it's going to be a high scoring back and forth to the end type of game?
I feel it's going to be closer than the experts think. I think people are thinking that Chicago is walking into a buzzsaw, and I think they're walking into a one-score game. The question is, I think Caleb Williams has the chance to feast through the air. I do think the Lions have a streak right now of 10 consecutive quarters with no touchdowns allowed. I think that streak will end in the first half of this game. You don't have the cornerback play, the safeties, Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph have been outstanding. Pro Football Focus grades over 90. But the reality is, you've got a real weakness at corner right now. You are thin at that position to begin with. I think Caleb Williams is going to go to Detroit and put up some points. Now, to say it's a winnable game doesn't mean Chicago is going to win.
Yeah.
But I think Bears fans will be watching that game in the fourth quarter saying, that Marc Ryan guy,
he was right.
Boy, he is a winnable game, by God.
All right. Well, Mark, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I know we talked off air a little bit about our connections with my previous program director. So shout out to Chad Scott because he's been an impactful part of both of our careers. But thank you so much for hopping on with me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, anytime, Taylor. Thanks so much. Happy to do it anytime. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there.
Yep. All right. Thank you to Marc Ryan, again, of 97.1 The Ticket, covering the Detroit Lions. So he's very positive, but said it right pretty much when it comes down to what's been the issues. The issues have been the coaching, and the issues have been this team has way too many statistical things saying they should be better than what they are, and they aren't winning games, and it's with a lot of talent. Jalen Johnson said it too, like this is a very talented roster, and it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't make sense because the moments you really needed your head coach to be that guy, he hasn't been able to be that guy. But I did want to read a quick little, give some love to Underdog Fantasy, because obviously that is something that we've been able to hopefully some of you have been winning some money this year off of them. So just remember, Underdog is the place to play if you're a sports fan looking to win money while watching sports. With over 5 million happy players and $2 billion won, Underdog makes it fun and easy to cash out on all your favorite athletes' performances. Compete against players just by selecting higher or lower on 2 or more player stats, and you could win up to 1,000 times your money. So turn every touchdown into a win with Underdog. I always like to bring up this one, the Red Zone Rush. I like this one because it's a game you will not find anywhere else. You just pick whether or not a player will score a touchdown by swiping right for yes and left for no. Simple as that. Plus, your entry will automatically be boosted, and you'll get a 51% profit boost when you play. I also like that Underdog puts the power to cash out in your hands. So now you can either keep writing with the entry, or you can tap that win now button to cash out whenever you want. So that's fun. Get that money right when you would like to get that money. Underdog is the best place to play champion. So sign up and deposit now using promo code CITY. That's CITY CITY to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash now. And you could get that instantly. So just remember that one of the things that I like is that higher or lower, just because it makes it a little easier for me without having to go super in depth to the numbers. Let's start. We've seen all of the on-pace numbers of what Caleb Williams needs to pass certain statistics when it comes to the all-time passers in Chicago Bears history. We'll see if that ends up happening. I think it's like 278 yards per game he has to have, something like that. But right now, 227.5 passing yards. You can go higher or lower on that. You can go over to the Jared Goff side. Is he going to do 1.5 passing touchdowns? You can go higher or lower on that. Jahmyr Gibbs, we talked about that run game. The defense has struggled with the run. I do think they've been a bit better recently, 18.5 receiving yards. They have for Jahmyr Gibbs. It's weird because they don't have the rushing yards on this right now, but they do have a half a rushing plus receiving touchdown. So you can go higher or lower on that one. And so a lot of ways you can go if you want to go that route with that easy higher or lower. Just download the app today and use the code CITY, that's CITY, to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. That's CITY CITY. The higher or lower number, remember, just click that. Makes it super easy. You make the call on Underdog just by selecting that. You must be 18 and up, 19 and up in Alabama, and Nebraska, 19 and up in Colorado for some games, 21 up in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply, void in Colorado. And if you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. If you're in Arizona, that's 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783 or Next Step, or you can text Next Step to 53342. If you're in New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. So, I think that when we talk about some of the things that have happened this year, it has been a lot of bad luck. It's been about some bad coaching decisions. But I do think that when you look at a team, there are exploitable things when it comes to Detroit. He just mentioned the cornerbacks. That's going to be something that I really do hope that we can take advantage of because if that is the weakness, then let Caleb Williams just feast on that weakness and let it just become a thing for him, because I think that is one of the positive things that we've seen out of Caleb this last couple weeks. Some of these, just threading the needle throws have been absolutely beautiful, and it's so fun to watch. Already Thomas Brown, what he's been able to do with this offense really kind of makes me frustrated, honestly, that Shane Waldron was even here as long as he is or as he was. But yeah, so we will see. It's going to be another tough one. We knew this stretch of games was not going to be easy, and the Bears have battled both weeks when it comes to the Packers. They should have won if it wasn't a blocked field goal, and they brought the Vikings into overtime. Even being down and being able to have that comeback in the fourth quarter was really fun to watch. So it would be kind of nice to get a little celebration on Thanksgiving, even though I know we want Eberflus fired. I would love a little happy turkey meal as the Bears beat the Lions. So we will see how that goes. But again, thanks to everybody for tuning in. I have some fun things coming up. Eventually, I'm working on a Kevin Byard Making Monsters. I think Kevin Byard has been one of the underrated signings of this last offseason, and it's been really, really fun to watch him develop. It's kind of sucked that Jaquan Brisker's been out. I'm really hoping that everything's okay with Brisker. He's one of my favorite players, but I still think that even Elijah Hicks came in, and then he was struggling, and then now they had to go make some moves and sign some safeties because of that room being kind of all banged up right now. But Kevin Byard's been a positive, so I do have a Making Monsters that I'm working on with him. But again, everybody enjoy your holiday. Happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy being with your family. Enjoy all of the food you'll get to eat, and hopefully enjoy a Bears football game. And I will catch you guys next time.